Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and it's time. Had to do it eventually. This is Elden Ring, and I have been playing this for about 15 hours at this point. Steam says I've been playing for about 18, but I know I spent some of that doing other things, so that's definitely not the case, but I have played at least 15 hours, and I will tell you right now that this is not the best game ever. It just isn't. If I'm being perfectly honest with you, I have a fair few problems with it. But I will say that it is the best Souls game ever. And that does come with a few things that need to be said about that. However, I will talk about the performance because, as you can tell by the frame rate counter in the top right of every little bit of footage I got for this video, including editing, which I feel like I have to do it now because I've said to myself that I'm only going to do one video for video games a week. So I kind of need to spice them up at least a little bit, and this is what I'm doing. So, yeah, anyway. Performance has actually been pretty good, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. Now, it has dropped from time to time when going into new areas, of course, and when certain effects show up on screen. But honestly, it hasn't been that bad at all. I haven't gotten any major mid-battle stutters. I haven't gotten any really bad crashes. There was like this one crash I got when I was being summoned into another world for co-op, but that happened once, and I got summoned something like 24 times, so it's not like that is a very common thing. I imagine they're on top of that. And otherwise, it holds a pretty steady 55 to 60 FPS, although admittedly, I don't have everything on Ultra because it makes my computer scream, so I definitely don't have that. I've turned a few things down, but honestly, once you fiddle around with it, the game seems to be okay. Give them a few more days to fix the rest of the bugs related to, like, shader compilation and DirectX 12 or what have you, and honestly, it'll probably work fine. With that said, though, I'll tell you what is a bit more of a pain in the ass that people have been talking about. The netcode. The netcode can be kind of awful. We got invaded at one point, me and a friend who played this game, and we just could not hit this guy. For some reason, every time we actually managed to hit him, he would just, like, magically morph out of it, like he was the one hosting the session, even though he was joining us. It was absolutely bizarre, and I'm not entirely sure what the deal was with that one, but okay, whatever. So, it's a Souls game. It's so Souls, in fact, that I'm probably going to end up using majority of Souls terminology while I'm talking about this, just because you're so used to the Souls terminology that it just fits in so well. Like, they call Souls, which are the currency you spend to level up and buy stuff, runes in this game, but we've just been calling them Souls and runes interchangeably. We talk about Sites of Grace like they're Bonfires. We talk about the Estus like it's the Flask of Crimson Tears, and so on, right? It's so Souls. They do not change anything about the formula at its most basic level. But to be fair, as I said before, this is probably the best execution of this formula so far. Now, I'm not counting something like Bloodborne, because frankly, that was so far out that it feels like its own thing. Same thing with Sekiro, of course. But this just goes after that formula with all haste. And there are just some minor things they've done to make it work. Because to be fair, Souls as a system does work really well just on the base of it, right? It's not exactly it's not exactly something that, you know, needed much in the way of changing. But all these little tweaks that they've added just in the moment-to-moment gameplay have just made things more interesting in general. Like, for example, the fact that you've got infinite sprint while you're not actually in a fight. Thank God. The fact that the death penalty has kind of been taken away. So, I mean, you still lose all your runes, don't get me wrong, but you don't lose anything else. You don't lose humanity. You don't lose the ability to summon people because that's handled by a different system now. You don't lose some other features and functions like that that would normally be tied to you being human, quote unquote. In fact, there is something technically that counts as this, but for your first few hours in the game, you're not going to have to worry about dying. And if you're not too worried about getting the great runes, which are basically like halfway towards superpowers that you get for beating the big bosses, you're not going to be too worried about it at all. And as a result, it's way less frustrating to die, especially if you're going up against the same boss over and over again. And they've even gone so far as to add checkpoints to certain parts of the world where you might not be able to get to a bonfire easily. So you'll be able to just get right back to what you were doing. So dying just ends up being way less frustrating than it used to, and it makes the game just way better as a result. And even then, they've introduced some, well, I should say reintroduced some features that actually work really well. Like, for example, power stancing is back, where you take one weapon in each hand of the same type and you can use them simultaneously with the left bumper. It works. I love it. I've power stanced dual greatswords in this run, and I'm absolutely loving the hell out of it. And it just works. It's good fun being able to do jumping attacks now, because of course there's a jump button in this game. And it's actually incredibly powerful if you hit the enemy with both swords. So, I'm just going to stick with these greatswords for the rest of the game, because why not? It's fun. I'm enjoying the hell out of it. But of course, all of the usual weapons and namesakes are here, but there's a few new ones as well. And they've also rebalanced the stats that I found, because all of them feel like they're actually useful. Like, Vigor is health, Mind is MP, Endurance is your just rolling and equip weight, you've got Strength and... bless me. You've got Strength and Dexterity, you've got Faith and Intelligence, and then you've got Arcane, which is your luck stat. There's no, like, extraneous stats, there's nothing that feels like a dumb stat. Everything feels like it's important. Poise is back, and I've always liked Poise, so it's good that it's here. And so, as a result, it just makes the game a bit smoother to play. You don't have to worry too much. You can generally figure out what you want to do and go for it pretty early on. And there are all sorts of, like, minor other tweaks like this, because I can't even, like, talk about all of them, because I've forgotten some of them off the top of my head, but you've got, like, multiplayer specific items now, and they're in their own menu, so you don't have to go through your entire inventory to get to it. Item sorting is actually pretty reasonable now. There's a bunch of other things that we could talk about that are just slight improvements on the formula, but they all add up. And that moment-to-moment gameplay of going in and smacking something in the face with either a sword or a spell, it just works. It genuinely just works just a little bit better than your traditional Souls game. And so as a result, it is just well worth the time just based on that in and of itself, because Souls has always been a really good game. Genre, thing, you know? So just off the bat, if you like Souls games, you will probably like this. There are some downsides that I will get to later on in this video, but yeah, if you like Souls, you will like this. One other major thing they've actually introduced in this game is summons. And not in the sense of pulling in someone from another game and having them help you out in co-op multiplayer, but they've actually introduced the ability to summon, like, enemies as ghost spirits that can help you out. And as a result, this entire game feels a bit more designed around co-op than the rest of the games. You do have a stealth system, but it does have a little bit in the way of just fiddliness. You can't tell exactly where an enemy can see you from and all that, but stealth will work in letting you get up behind someone and shank them. But sometimes you'll just end up in a fight and you'll need to take a bunch of dudes out, and you'll want a little bit of backup even if you're playing solo, because you're being swarmed by like 10 things at once, and these summons are here to help you out. They cost magic to summon, but they're actually pretty good. They've got a decent health bar. They know how to get out of the way of at least a handful of attacks, and they're genuinely helpful when it comes to certain boss fights. So yeah, nothing wrong with that feature. I actually enjoy it quite a bit. It's just the fact that everything else around the open world side of things and the way that they've made this is just a little bit off to me personally. So yeah, Elden Ring has an open world now, and it's big. Like, it's really, really freaking big. It takes ages to get from one side of it to another. It has a bunch of little things going on. So the majority of the content you'll be seeing in this open world, this isn't Breath of the Wild. This is entirely different. It has dungeons, mini-dungeons, and encounters. Dungeons are big. They feel like Dark Souls levels. Then you've got mini-dungeons, which will usually only take you like 20 to 30 minutes complete, and they'll have a boss at the end. And they're full of recycled content. And I'll just say that right off the bat, because they are. You'll see the same theme across a bunch of the mini-dungeons as you go through the game. And it's not that big of a deal. If anything, it's what I was hoping the Chalice dungeons would be like. But at the same time, they do end up feeling a bit like Chalice dungeons, because you can clearly see some of the pieces that they've recycled and stuck back together. but the combat encounters are pre-designed, so it's not like they're going to be absolute BS to get through. Like, well, I mean, Chalice Dungeons weren't that bad either, but it's not like they're actively screwing you, is what I'm trying to say with that. And then out in the open world, you've got encounters, and these encounters are like enemies just standing around that you can take out, and they'll actually give you Estus back. And this is kind of nice, and if co-op worked the way you would expect it to, where you start at like one bonfire, a journey through the world, kill a few things, and get your Estus back when you go through a certain set of challenges, and then pop into a dungeon and complete it, that would be great. But it's made this really weird. It's made really weird because when you get to a new dungeon or a new area, it's often got a fog gate over it, and it forces you to cut your connection with the other player, wander in, and then re-establish it. And it's weird. I don't know why they do it like this. There might be something, like, I don't know, a buff or something maybe that would cause people to be overpowered if they tried this, but I still don't understand why they wouldn't let you in anyway. It's just odd. And it makes co-op a little bit more of a pain in the ass than it really should be, because you just have to wander in, cut them off, wander in, and then summon them back in, and then you have to do that twice or 3 times with how many people you're playing with. And it can be a bit annoying, I'll just say that much. And it also doesn't help when they feel the need to recycle content a lot. It's got a bit of open world syndrome going on, because a lot of the areas that you'll come across, like the churches and the places that will give you certain items in order to upgrade your Estus, will be the same every single time. Certain areas will have very similar layouts to each other, but they'll just have a different set of enemies plopped down on top. And things along those lines that just make a lot of the game feel recycled. So it just does feel like it's got open world syndrome. Although it does bring in these unique encounters from time to time where things will go down entirely differently from what you expect. And those are genuinely a lot of fun. I just wish there was more of them, because you just spend a lot of time going through very similar areas doing very similar things, and it can kind of slow you down a bit. And it also doesn't help that the rewards you get from these areas, while it isn't random, if you're working towards like a certain build and you're looking for certain weapons or items or magic spells or what have you, you'll find yourself going through a lot of these dungeons picking up things that you just can't use or that you have no use for, just because they're not really meant for your class. And it's just weird, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, having to go through all these dungeons and getting things that you otherwise wouldn't want. You do have the ability to sell stuff really early on, so it's not that big of a deal if you just want to sell off all the weapons you don't plan on using for a bit of extra soul gain. It's just, yeah, you'll be spending a lot of time doing a lot of things that otherwise won't feel entirely relevant to you. But when you do get to the big dungeons that are basically just Dark Souls levels, where you'll wander through on a linear path, but there'll be secrets off to the side to find, and some of these can be absolutely massive. Wait until you get to the Storm Hill Castle after you beat one of the relatively bigger bosses, but not one of the big chaps. And it's huge, it's got multiple paths, there's a lot of platforming to do, and it feels just like a Dark Souls level, and you'll be spending more time in that than you will in 5 or 6 of these encounters combined. And it doesn't, like, completely break that ratio, right? It doesn't make it so that it's too overloaded on the repetitive overworld stuff, but it is still worth noting there's a lot of it. It also doesn't really help that discoverability is kind of a pain in the ass, even when you've actually gotten the maps, and thankfully they make it easy to get the maps because they highlight where they are on the big map itself and you can just go straight for it. But unless you've got some really good eyes, it's really easy to miss some of the smaller out-of-the-way locations that might actually help you out in the future, whether they be merchants, like smaller areas that lead to underground dungeons, things along those lines. It can be kind of a pain in the neck, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, just because you'll miss a bunch of things and then a friend will go by on the same map and tell you about all these things you missed and be like, how the hell did I miss them? I was right next to them the entire time. It's not as obvious as Breath of the Wild with its simplistic art style compared to this. It's not a simple looking game by any means, but this game is very detailed. This game has a lot of things going on in its environment that can make things harder to see. Meanwhile, Breath of the Wild, anything that you really need to worry about sticks out like a sore thumb in that game. So as a result, it's not too hard to see things. This game just kind of has that problem. There's also bonfires everywhere. Seriously, you'll go like, say, you'll go 5 minutes and you'll find 4 bonfires in some cases. It's genuinely a bit much, just how many there are. And then you've got the bloody crafting. Because, of course, it's an open world game, we have to have crafting. And to be fair, I do appreciate what some of this does. Like, for example, the new multiplayer item that lets you see people's summon signs is actually something you get off the ground. You just pick up 2 of these things and it lets you make a crafting item. So if you're picking them up along the way, you'll be able to, what's the word I'm looking for? If you're picking them up on the way, you'll be able to craft a ton of them as you go and you won't have to worry about them. But you'll end up in this position where you're just wandering along pressing the Y button and it's like, couldn't I just like pick these up by myself? It does help that you get the horse that lets you wander around a lot faster than normal, but you also don't get to use the horse in multiplayer. So have fun running through the multiplayer just on foot with your mates instead of having just slightly faster travel to work with. And even then, it's just sometimes it feels really slow to get around this world. It's genuinely huge. There is so many things you need to worry about. It can be frustrating, if I'm being perfectly honest, the way the open world has been integrated into this game, because it just feels like they've taken a traditional set of open world tropes and slapped it on top of Souls. And it does work out well in some circumstances. As I said, the items you need for multiplayer, you can just get them by picking up 2 leaves off the ground and crafting them. And it does mean that some items aren't limited anymore, like things like fire grease, which lets you put fire on your weapon. Throwables and stuff like that aren't limited anymore, which is nice. And there is absolutely the sort of open world benefit where you can be wandering along and find something hidden away in a bush that takes you to a much further ahead area, and you can take the opportunity to run around and see if there's anything cool there. It means that you might be going for one place, get distracted by another place, and end up in this massive underground dungeon with a bunch of places of grace and a bunch of, what's the word I'm looking for? A bunch of, just a bunch of enemies and a boss to fight. And then you'll come back up and you'll be like, crap, what was I doing? And that's always fun. It's just, yeah, it's all the other stuff. It's taking forever to get around the world. It's the way that it makes co-op a pain in the ass. The recycled content, the fact that you need to be crafting a bunch of stuff instead of just making it easier, like letting us just pick that multiplayer stuff up off of the floor, you know? But I'd be lying if I said I still wasn't enjoying it. That's the thing. It's just, the open world is where the majority of my critiques come in. There is also the story, to which I say, what story? I'm only 15 hours in, I haven't got that many key items, so I don't know what's going on. Literally, the intro cutscene is Dark Souls 2-esque. These are the people you need to go kill. Then you will become the Elden Lord of the Ring. And so just go kill them, please. And that's basically the entirety of the plot that you get. And the rest is the usual character-driven, meet them in one place, do a thing, meet them in another place to continue their storyline, maybe get some cool items at the end. It's exactly as you would expect from that in and of itself. Did I mention the netcode yet? I should probably mention the netcode in case I forgot to do it on this take. So, the netcode is... No, actually I did. Never mind. I remember it was back up in the performance section. So, there is teleporting everywhere you can go. Everywhere that you found a site of grace, which is nice, so it lets you pop back and forth. And, I mean... God, what else do I have to say? I appreciate all the things that they've added. The combat is as smooth as ever. The fact that they've done things like giving you infinite sprint and rebalanced the stats and given you summons to help you out even if you're only playing solo, and a bunch of other things along those lines. Covenants are gone, actually, as far as I can tell. I haven't come across any so far. I've seen a few people that you have to give items to, but I haven't seen anything approaching a covenant. It's mainly just summon in to protect people or have people be summoned in to protect you. And that's perfectly fine by me, because I always thought the covenants were a bit too much of a grind, to the point where I never bothered with them, so that's okay. Bloodstains and ghosts haven't been working properly, but they have said that this is a problem they've been meaning to fix. Oh yeah, there is a potion making mechanic now, which is fun. It lets you make your own special potion that you can do certain things when you find items in the world. That's fun to play with, alongside the usual upgradable Estus and all that. I've only played a power stance and great swordsman, so I can't really give you any opinions on like the magic side of things, but it's apparently okay, because the friend of mine who's been playing magic hasn't gone off it yet, so that works well enough. I don't really know what else to say. This is, of course, first impressions as always, and I'm trying to keep these videos relatively short from now on so people will watch them all the way through, so I guess I might as well just summarize. It's the best Souls game ever, because the Souls stuff is basically throwing in everything that worked from all the other games, like power stancing, certain other features like poison stuff that I can't really list off of the top of my head. It adds little tweaks to make it even better, like having infinite sprint, not being penalized too harshly for death, at least not early on anyway. Reintroducing some of the cool stuff, rebalancing stats so it's not as BS. Even doing minor things like making a multiplayer item category just to keep things organized like that. Having summons that you can bring along to help you play in solo, because this is very clearly meant to be a more co-op-ish game. But then you bring in the open world, and a lot of it kind of starts to not so much fall apart, but the cracks start showing. Repeated encounters, recycling content, adding a crafting system that's just kind of more of a pain in the ass than anything. The way that it breaks co-op in half because you have to go and just de-summon and resummon. And the fact that there's bonfires literally everywhere, like you can't go 5 minutes without finding one 90% of the time, means that it just feels a bit weird, and it feels like they just kind of slapped an open world design on top of Dark Souls, and they were just like, okay, let's work with it and patchwork the problems as we go. But it still does have that sense of adventure, finding things, finding really cool dungeons or bosses to fight, beating the crap out of them, getting new weapons, getting better at the game, going back to old bosses you weren't able to beat before, and beating them senseless. It does still have that Souls feeling to it, even if you find yourself being a bit frustrated just running around all the time trying to find things in the open world, because it's huge and kind of hard to see things. With that said, this is still a really good game though, and it is one I can recommend. Honestly, it might even be the best first Souls game, just because you can get those summons that'll help you out. And so as a result, it can be just that little bit easier to get into, because you can just have just enemy friends and friend friends. Well, actually, no, you can't. You can only summon in multiplayer spirits, or you can summon in the enemy spirits and play just pure solo. And that's just how it works, but yeah. Those are my first impressions on Elden Ring. It's worth your time buying. This has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.